Our first speaker is Nick Lovett from the Christchurch City Council. He's a transportation planner for the council. He's had an extreme interest in shared transport services, and I might struggle with this, as well as socio-demographic, economic and technological trends affecting cities. I was just speaking to Nick beforehand. He's just spent 3 years in Toronto and wanted to come back to Christchurch because he was excited about what's going on in our city. So we're obviously loving to have people like Nick back in the city. So without further ado, Nick, over to you.
Well, thanks very much for the introduction, David. So I've got a bit of an overview and of sort of the Christchurch Transport Plan, what's happening, what we're interested in, and yeah, I mean, if anyone's got any questions, just feel free to ask during the presentation. It's a pretty small group. So the Christchurch Transport Strategic Plan was sort of the start of some of the new transport thinking in the city. So that was coming up on 5 years ago as the city was rebuilding, and this was the plan that shaped a lot of the thinking around particularly the cycleways. So for a long time, a lot of the transport thinking was involved about sort of major arterials and minor arterials and how many vehicles we can put through a road. But taking sort of a wider view and thinking about some of the wider benefits we can achieve through the transport network, we started thinking a lot more about modal networks and how to create a more sustainable transport system. And the cycleways were kind of the start of that, and they're probably the most well known of the transport projects to come out of that. So modal networks, as I was talking about before, that's the idea of sort of designing a network where you've got strategic road networks, strategic public transport networks, and of course strategic cycling networks. And the cycling network there was sort of sketched out. There was an idea that we can connect the city through these cycleways to encourage this interested but concerned group. There's a lot of people that are keen to try cycling, but feel that it's not safe, or that the infrastructure is not there. Safety is a huge concern for a lot of people that won't cycle. And Christchurch is a perfect cycling city. For a very, very long time, cyclists were seen everywhere in the city up until about sort of the 1950s and 1960s, when there was a slow decline. But it's on the rise. There's more people out and about cycling, which is excellent. The cycleways are starting to come online. There's 2 of them that are completed now, and the idea is that we'll make Christchurch, that cycling city that it once was, and become more known for that, much like Copenhagen or Amsterdam are in the Northern Hemisphere. So there's a photo there of the intersection of Colombo and Hereford Street in the 1920s, I think. So you can see, there was cyclists sort of everywhere, and they were sort of mixing, and it was a lot more safe when you have this sort of safety numbers effect. Another sort of key step in the cycleways was to come up with some design guidance, and there was a design guidance manual published, and that sort of spelled out the look and feel of the cycleways that we were trying to attain. And some of them are starting to come on now, but the premise was they have to be separated, they have to be safe, they're designed for children and seniors. There's an idea around 80 cities. If it's not safe for an 8-year-old or an 80-year-old, it's not really working at all. So the cycleways are primarily sort of made up of these greenways, these neighbourhood greenways with lots of traffic calming, and the separated cycleways and the separated cycle infrastructure. So I talked about this interested but concerned group. There's sort of studies that have been looked at to sort of understand how big this group is, or this cohort. And so we think about sort of 30% of residents are just on the cusp of cycling, or thinking, I'd like to cycle more, but it's not safe, or there's not enough infrastructure. And so those are the people we're talking about. A lot of people think that the cycleways are built for existing cyclists, and it almost seems counterintuitive. They're not being built for people that are already on bikes. They're built to sort of encourage and entice people out onto their bikes. And I saw there was this publication a couple months ago lying on, lying on a coffee table somewhere, and I snapped a photo of it and remember that, the senior citizen pedal power for the city of cyclists. So I think that reputation is starting to come through, which is really, really encouraging. Ooh, go back. So this is essentially the cycle network today. There's a couple that are completed. The Northern Line Cycleway, the Papanui Parallel, the Quarryman's Trail, and part of the Coastal Pathway is complete. So in a few years, that's the idea. That's what it'll look like. It'll be about 150 kilometres of separated cycleways, and that will be supported by a network of local cycleways as well. So it'll be a really comprehensive and connected network. A few trends that I'm really interested in. The transport landscape is changing very, very, very quickly, and all the time things are being sort of disrupted. And even electric vehicles themselves, the rate at which they're being sold and the rate at which people are driving them is sort of outpacing predictions that are a few years old. And in the area of cycling, something that's very interesting to us is the idea of e-bikes. A few years ago, I think we looked at the use case, and most people thought, they're for hills, or is there going to be a use case or an uptake in Christchurch? More and more, we're hearing about people that haven't cycled for a very long time, are maybe a little bit unfit, maybe live a bit too far from where they're going. E-bikes are fantastic. People are using them as this sort of gateway to cycling, which is really interesting. Not to mention sort of cargo bikes as well, and bicycles for children. With children on the back, they're becoming sort of very utilitarian, which is really interesting to see, and I think it's going to help add to the cycle mode share uptake. As I've mentioned before, I am sort of very interested in sort of these trends and how we can sort of plan for them in the future. I often talk about there's sort of these big demand side, macro trends, the socio-demographics, economics, and then there's these new emerging enablers like e-bikes and things. And this transport future is going to be sort of a combination of these macro trends driving change and these new emerging enablers offering transport choice. So, we are seeing a big cultural shift in the way people sort of want to live and where they want to work. People want more balance. People don't really like people that sort of commute long distances are generally sort of more unhappy with their commute than people that sort of walk, cycle, and take public transport. Buying behaviour is shifting as well, and new and emerging technologies, like driverless vehicles are something that are of a lot of interest to us as well. It is very difficult to sort of predict what the future will look like, but we have been notoriously bad for it in the past. This is a graph from the Ministry of Transport predicting how much we travel each year, and so the rate of travel has been sort of over-predicted for many years. I thought it would keep going up, but we're sort of stabilising, and we've sort of come to this nice equilibrium. As I mentioned, it's human behaviour. People don't like commuting very long distances or for hours in the morning, hours in the evening, and it'll plateau off. So that's really encouraging to see the vehicle kilometres travelled each year sort of stabilising, and people wanting more transport choice. The transport land use problem is something that's beginning to be much more thoroughly understood by transport planners and city officials. The way cities grow and are shaped is very much a product of the transport infrastructure that connects them. Much of the city that we're familiar with today is a product of sort of this post-war economic boom and single detached dwellings that were enabled by cheap transport such as the private car. That could be all these changes could be yield a positive benefit, or maybe there's some challenges with that. We might see more urban sprawl, and we might sort of see super commuting to the exurbs. But I think with all this change, there are some really interesting opportunities and really exciting opportunities. Automation may yield positive benefits. I mean, we might see the rise of these driverless shuttles bringing people to the first mile and the last mile of their transport option, much like Omeo, who are here today, I think, around the back, so check them out. Electrification as well, not just private vehicles, but also public transport vehicles, buses. The amount of the route of a bus is always very predetermined and defined, so it's an excellent candidate for electrification because you don't have that range anxiety problem. Obviously, car sharing is another great candidate, and Kirsten will be talking about that just after me, and bike sharing as well. I mean, that's another opportunity for electrification and just for transport choice in general. The long-term vision that was sort of set out in the transport plan is for a much healthier, much more livable, and much more vibrant city, and I think we're starting to realise that with some of the cycleways coming online, some of the other transport projects in the central city. We're seeing a lot more greenery on the streets, and we're thinking not so much about the benefits to the transport user, but these wider benefits to the general public and to the environment. So the transport paradigm and the transport planning paradigm is shifting very rapidly, and I think it's a very exciting time, I think, for Christchurch. Here's just a couple of before and afters of some of that greenery and planting I was talking about in the central city. We've got a lot more people-friendly places, and the city's becoming a lot more inviting. So that's something that we're very keen to see realised as well. And sort of this future visioning and thinking about how we're going to move around Christchurch in the future. Like I said, it's always very, very difficult to predict. But there are a few studies that are being conducted around the world, and thinking about maybe we'll have a much more autonomous future. Maybe we're not going to spend a lot of time driving. The City of Vancouver commissioned a study in a report to say, if this does come to pass, what does that mean for our streets? Do we need more parking, less parking, wider roads, narrower roads? And they sort of had this sketch that I've used a few times in some slides, and so this is sort of the before. This is very typical of sort of a downtown street, the intersection of two minor arterials, and the afterwards, we can see cars being spaced much more close together. The reduced need for car parking, we can move it off the road where it's very dangerous, move it to off-street car parking where it's safer and more convenient, and more people-friendly spaces for active modes, greenery, street furniture, and infrastructure. So a lot of the things that we're already doing, I think, are very well aligned to the sort of these likely future scenarios, which is really encouraging as well. Some wider sort of transport trends. I've touched on them before, but just mention maybe a couple more specific ones to think about. There is a bit of a shift from transport being offered as a product to transport being consumed as a service, and this is car sharing and bike sharing and all those things. And we're seeing, a big rise in these services overseas, and it's very exciting to sort of see them emerge here in Christchurch with services like Yugo. I think that's just about it. So, if anyone's got any questions, I'd love to, have a discussion or catch up with me later. That's more than fine as well. Okay.
One question.
Yes.
Have you seen uptake in cycling, given the changes you've been making at the council and the work's been done?
Yeah, absolutely. So a big prerequisite for a lot of these infrastructure projects is a really robust business case with lots of monitoring. So there was baseline cycle counts done, for 12 months before work had started, and on some streets we're seeing 20, 30, 40, 50% increases in the numbers. Hagley Path, which has been widened, and it sort of ends just at Armour Street there. That, we think, is the busiest cycle route in the country. It's got about 1,800 trips per day going through it. There's a cycle counter on Quay Street in Auckland. That's the busiest, densest part of the largest city in the country, and that only sees about 1,100 a day. So very, very encouraging to see these numbers, and they'll certainly sort of be published as the data becomes available.
What about charging stations for electric bikes? Do you see any sort of need for anything like that?
Yeah, the bus interchange that was completed about 2 years ago, there's a large secured cycle parking area, And in the brief, there was that came up, and there are a few wall sockets in there, and that was the intended purpose, to put 240-volt wall sockets for charging of electric bikes. We haven't really seen a lot of usage, but I think that's a product of the electric bicycles having more than enough range, I think, for the daily commute. I think with the Litchfield Street car parking opening, there's a couple of wall sockets in there as well. But again, we haven't seen that so much. We find people have have more than enough range, but it was a consideration. So it'll be interesting to see if we continue with that, or maybe there isn't a need or isn't a use case.